Okay, shoutout mga idol. So ngayong araw naman ay ang bigyan natin ng comments and reaction ay tungkol po dito sa budget hearing ng confidential fund ng Office of the President na hinahanapan ng details ni Representative Edcel Lagman. So ito nga mga idol, no, medyo mainit at medyo na high blood po dito si Representative Edcel Lagman. Pero bago pa man simulan po natin itong ating bibigyan ng comments and reaction ay pasubscribe muna ng ating channel sa hindi pa nakasubscribe, and sa hindi pa nakalike, yes of course pa-like naman po ng ating channel, and maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat.
Dear colleagues, it is my honor and privilege to sponsor the proposed appropriations of the Office of the President for the fiscal year 2023. In order for the Office of the President to perform its roles and discharge its many duties, a budget of 8.969 billion is respectfully requested. The amount, if I may point out, represents a mere 1/6 of 1% of the proposed total national budget for the next year. These funds are needed by the Office of the President in order to do the challenging job of navigating our nation out of the devastation of the pandemic. For the past 3 fiscal years, the budget of the Office of the President has been flat, and this is due to the lockdowns which reduced presidential public engagements and postponed personnel recruitment. But as society, borders, and the economy open, the President has to conduct the affairs of the state outside the restricted confines of his office in order to project the return to normalcy. As you have noticed, more meetings are being conducted, more presidential public engagements, and more official visits are being held. The cabinet is convened often. Freed from health restrictions, there has been an endless stream of consultations in Malacanang, befitting its role as the policy center. The President's calendar and call sheets are full. There are also traditional international engagements which must be fulfilled by the head of state. But the expenses they incur are recouped by the rich harvest of investments secured. The conduct of face-to-face statecraft, whether here or abroad, is something no leader of a nation can avoid today. However, the budget adjustment we seek, Mr. Speaker, is largely due to the increase of the personal services. Slight 34.17%, slight increase in MOOE, 5.9%, increase in capital outlay of only 2.75%, for an overall increase of 9.62% from the previous General Appropriations Act of 2022. Mr. Speaker, the Office of the President budget output indicators through the approved budget allocation will aim to achieve its mission that shall be fully responsive to the specific needs and requirements of the President as head of state and government, Chief Executive, and Commander-in-Chief of the Republic of the Philippines. I therefore appeal for the approval of the budget of the Office of the President, not as a mere courtesy to be extended, but because every item therein is needed and is reasonable in order to best serve the interests of the Filipino people.
Since the President has control and supervision over executive departments and agencies as Chief Executive, he has direct control of trillions of outlays in the General Appropriations Bill consisting, among others, of the following: Office of the President proper and its attached agencies, other executive departments, particularly the budget of the Department of Agriculture, which he temporarily heads, budget of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, and the allocation of the NTFL as Commander-in-Chief. Special purpose funds which could not be disbursed without his prior imprimatur, and confidential and intelligence funds embedded in various government agencies and departments. Will the distinguished sponsor, Mr. Speaker, confirm this statement as correct?
Mr. Speaker, dear colleague, these agencies have their own budgets, no? And though the president exercises administrative control over these agencies, the president does not have direct control over the expenses or the disbursements of these amounts, since these amounts are line budgeted, and the president's management style is to give full authority to the department secretaries to fulfill the mandate that is given to the president and given to the cabinet secretary as the alter ego of the president in the said department. With regards to the Department of Agriculture, though the president sits as the acting secretary of the Department of Agriculture right now, we don't really know until when the president will sit as the cabinet secretary. So as soon as the cabinet secretary of the Department of Agriculture is appointed, the secretary of the Department of Agriculture as the alter ego for agricultural concerns will be the one to implement the budget of the Department of Agriculture, Mr. President, dear colleague.
Well, that may be correct, distinguished sponsor. But would the distinguished sponsor agree that the president has control and supervision over all the departments and agencies of the executive department?
Mr. Speaker,
Alright mga idol, pakilala muna natin ha, yung ating interpolator or nag-interpolate ay si Representative Edcel Lagman ng 1st District ng Albay.
dear colleague, supervision and control over the department, I agree with our esteemed colleague, but not control over the budget of the said department, since there is a department secretary who will administer the budget of the said department.
I think, Mr. Speaker, the distinguished sponsor is diminishing the power of the president. The department heads and other heads of offices may be alter egos only of the president. But all of these alter egos have their principal, and that is the president.
But the reason why we are deliberating now on the budget, because it is Congress who determines the budget. And in our system of budgeting nowadays, which is line budgeting, the president has little or no leeway on items that are line budgeted. So with regards to management of the department, the president and management over the alter egos who are the cabinet secretaries, the president has control. But the president does not have leeway or full control over the budget of any department, since this budget is approved by Congress, Mr. Speaker, dear colleague.
Well, that might be correct, distinguished sponsor. But after the Congress has exercised the power of the purse, the ascendant power to disburse belongs to the president. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, Mr. Speaker, dear colleague.
Mr. Speaker, can the distinguished sponsor ask his co-sponsors who were previous members or current members of the Congress when this practice was done, whether they were victims of for later release?
Mr. Speaker, dear colleague, I think what is important now is we're deliberating on the incoming fiscal year 2023 budget. And I would assure the our honorable colleague that the FLR, or I think it means for later release, does not exist anywhere in the budget or the proposed budget of the fiscal year 2023. Your Honor, dear colleague.
Of course, Mr. Speaker, distinguished sponsor, FLR does not exist as an item in the budget. You cannot find the phrase FLR in the budget. It is a practice of the executive in exercising its power of the power to disburse to the special purpose funds, which will be debated later. But, Mr. Speaker, may we know from the distinguished sponsor whether special purpose funds can be released and disbursed without the imprimatur of the President?
Mr. Speaker, dear colleague, it has to be approved by the President, but released through the DBM, Mr. Speaker, dear colleague.
Thank you.
So, grabe talaga dito mga idol yung halongkat. Ayan, Representative Lagman. Nalungkat niya talaga. Baka may mahalongkat siya na konting pagkakamali na makitaan ng butas para itong budget ng Office of the President ay hindi maaprubahan. Talaga nakita natin na marami siyang gustong tinatanong, marami siyang gustong malaman, lalo na pagdating kung saan talaga gagastusin itong pondo, paano gagastusin ang pondo na ito.
Can confidential and intelligence funds be disbursed by the agencies enjoying these funds without the prior approval of the President? Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Yes, those line items under specific agencies can be released by those specific agencies.
Confidential or intelligence fund can be released and utilized by the agency without the prior approval of the President. That is a traditional practice that is part of the special and general provisions in the General Appropriations Act every year.
Confidential funds are released by the agency. But here, I will read the provision on the in the GAA, Section 78. Confidential funds authorized in this act shall be released and disbursed only upon the approval of the department secretary concerned. Confidential expenses refers to those related to surveillance activities in civilian government agencies that are intended to support the mandate and operations of the agency. So, Mr. Speaker, dear colleague, based on Section 78, it is the department secretary concerned who will release and disburse, who will approve the release and disbursement of the confidential funds.
Sponsor, we can ask the Department of Budget and Management whether confidential funds can be released by the head of agency without the prior approval of the President. How about with respect to intelligence fund?
The intelligence fund has to be approved by the Office of the President upon presentation of the project plan of the said department.
On audit, inform this chamber that although it makes a post-audit of confidential and intelligence funds disbursement, it could not disclose to this House the results of such audits because of the nature of confidentiality of said funds. Does the distinguished sponsor recall this statement from COA?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, dear colleague, yes, that is true. by the very nature of the confidential and intelligence funds, it cannot be disclosed to Congress. But, Mr. Speaker, dear colleague, the Office of the President submits quarterly the report of the confidential and intelligence funds to both houses of Congress.
The total amount of 4.5 billion for confidential fund and intelligence funds.
I would like to apologize that I could not reply to that question because it is a question with regards to the disbursement of the confidential funds, and that the funds being confidential, I apologize that I will not be able to reply to that question, Mr. Speaker, dear colleague.
So yung mga idol, no, ang sabi ng ating sponsor na in regards po sa disbursement ng intelligence fund and confidential fund ay hindi po pwede ma-details ayon dito sa ating sponsor. So tingnan natin kung tuloy pa rin yung pangungulit ni Representative Edcel Lagman.
Requisite physical and financial plan justifying the request has been submitted by the Office of the President. 4.5 billion confidential and intelligence funds of the President is bigger than the proposed budget of the following departments and agencies, among others. The Civil Service Commission, which is a constitutional body, which has only 1.9 billion. The Commission on Human Rights, which is created by virtue of the Constitution, has only 833.7 million. The Department of Human Settlements and Urban Development has only 1.4 billion. The Department of Tourism has only 3.5 billion. The Office of the Press Secretary has only 1.5 billion. And this 4.5 billion being asked by the Office of the President is almost as big as the appropriation for the COMELEC in the amount of 4.9 billion and the Ombudsman in the amount of 4.7 billion. Does the distinguished sponsor confirm these figures?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, dear colleague, the figures are confirmed.
Top of the President's 4.5 confidential and intelligence funds, he has also direct and exclusive control of the various confidential and intelligence funds embedded in the various government departments and agencies. And for the proposed 2020 General Appropriations Bill, there is a total of 9.290385 billion pesos in confidential and intelligence funds in the budget of various agencies and departments, including the Office of the President.
Total of 9,276,435,000, broken down into 4.957627 billion in intelligence funds and 4.318808 in confidential funds. Mr. Speaker, we join the appeal of our honorable colleague that and the manifestation that a lot of agencies need additional funds and are equal of importance to all our constituents. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, distinguished sponsor, for your candid answers. And I hope that this Congress, this House, will be able to fund these other.
So yung mga idol, no, overall total ay naging pabor naman or natanggap naman ni Representative Edcel Lagman yung budget baga ng Office of the Vice President ay approve naman sa kanya. Yun nga, no, ang gusto niya lang talaga ay malaman ang bawat detalye kung saan at kung paano ito gastusin ang confidential fund at intelligence fund ng Office of the Vice President, which is hindi nga pwede detalye ayon sa ating sponsor kasi nga confidential. Ika nga. So at hiniling din ni Representative Lagman na sana dagdagan yung budget ng Commission on Human Rights, Human Settlement and Urban Affairs, and the Department of Tourism at tsaka na rin yung Office of the Secretary. So yun nga yung budget na hinihingi ng Office of the President. Office of the President ay umabot ng 9.27 billion na kini-question ni Representative Edcel Lagman. So overall, and majority naman ay pabor naman para sa budget ng Office of the President. So maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. Yun po yung ating comments, reaction. I am from our personal. Okay, maraming salamat and God bless everyone. Thank you so much for watching. Huwag kalimutang like ang ating video. Baka hindi mo pa na-like. Thank you.